welcome to Institute of Directors panel discussion. Today, the panel is going to discuss digital transformation deficit in the boardroom. That's the topic for the day today. On behalf of Institute of Directors, I would like to thank all of you for joining this panel discussion in the middle of a working week and also almost at the end of a working day. So thank you for being resilient to come to this panel discussion. I would like to also introduce the panel to you. The first panel member that I'll introduce is Ashish Kumar Gupta. Ashish is Corporate Vice President of SCL Technologies, and he runs for SCL, a business which is in north of $3 billion. So Ashish, welcome. Then I have got Lizelette. Lizelette is a technology leader from the background, but now Lizelette sits into multiple listed companies in the Nordic region. And Lizelette is also on the board of a number of private companies. So initially starting with tech leadership and now a veteran board member and also board chair. Then, so welcome Lizelette. Natasha is my third panelist. Natasha Davidova is currently the Global Head of Infrastructure and Information Security for Allianz. And again, Natasha had a very, very accomplished career across a number of companies in global roles, including Standard Chartered Bank, and also on the services side, EDS, what used to be EDS now has become HP. So Natasha, welcome to the panel. And last but not the least, and the very, very common face to most of the Institute of Director members is Charlotte. Charlotte is a veteran FTSE 350 chair, FTSE 100 chair and board member. And of course, Charlotte was also the chair for Institute of Directors just about a year back. So Charlotte, welcome back to the panel again. Thank you. So just to let our audiences know that we are going to run this meeting or the panel discussion under Chatham House rules. So please do observe that. What it does is it gives our panelists the freedom to express themselves without any boundaries. That's what you need. That's what you want as original ideas. And we will be giving you access to them through LinkedIn. And of course, if you've got any follow-up, the panelists are very happy to engage with you on one-to-one basis. So with that, I would like to open this panel discussion. The first panel discussion point for me, I will be starting with Charlotte. There's no pressure on Charlotte anymore. So Charlotte, my first topic, which I really want you to open up is for the panel. Is there a digital transformation capability deficit in the boardroom? Especially because you sit into many, many boards and you also do board advisory, you also do board evaluation. So how do you see from your position that is there a capability deficit or is it some fiction?
There is definitely a deficit that needs to be addressed rather rapidly. Unfortunately, it's in pretty much every single boardroom I've been involved with even recent ones. And it is something that I think needs to be addressed in a specific way, because often technology people tend to be slightly different from your sort of standard board members. So you're actually going into diversity when you're looking to hire technology board members, which, is interesting, but a bit of a barrier, because boards are notoriously unhappy to really embrace someone too different from themselves. So that's quite a big issue, but the opportunities that they lose out on that means that it's really, really urgent that they start considering changing that. I mean, I'm involved with private equity, and interestingly in private equity and private equity owned businesses, you don't see the same kind of things. You actually see digitalization being pushed for quite aggressively, which is good. We were involved with a large fitness center, for example, with 500 million members, and they had 36 different operating systems because they had bought lots of smaller ones and brought them together. So the finance director was not super interested in starting to look at robotics, but he was forced to do it in the end, because as opposed to taking all 36 systems into one new one, you could, or he did in the end, put in 4 robotics to the systems that logged into all of the 36 different ones and brought it all together in one place, saving the company 360,000 euros per quarter within 4 months. So significant reason to make sure that you can in the boardroom push for these things, and you have someone who is digitally able to drive that push, and that the rest of the board members are interested enough to fully understand why this is super important these days.
So Lizelette, another board perspective, because you are now quite a bit of a experienced board member in the Nordic region. And of course, the Nordic has also become the latest hotbed for technology innovation. Do you believe there are digital transformation capability deficits, and how big it is?
Yes, I will concur with a lot of what Charlotte said. I'll give some other dimensions, but I think that what we also forget is that the pace and scope of change going on doesn't necessarily mean that a person like myself with a lot of tech background, if I don't keep myself updated, I will still not be very valuable in the boardroom. So I say it's not just the deficit with the composition there it is. The deficit is also about keeping yourself updated, whether you actually have a tech background or not. And when I started my board career, I actually found that board work doesn't work. That was my view. So I started another company to do research, academic research, to do advisory and to work with startups. And in that, we actually did a survey. We started to do the survey. We still do the survey. And we look into the capabilities of businesses and the leadership capabilities of businesses into digital specifically. And when we measured that the first time, the business capabilities that people thought they had was about 39%. 7 years later, they still think it's about 39%. Why is that? Well, of course, it's because we have a tremendous growth in digital and exponential development during that time. And people are really working very hard, all businesses and boards, to keep up with that. But worse than that is that when we did the first measure on the leadership and board capability to guide the companies, they thought that 45% had a good capability to guide the companies. That has now shrunk to 35%. So now they feel that 35% of the boards and leaders can even guide their businesses going forward. So I think the deficit is specifically on the leadership side, but also for all of us to remember that it's a super complex, very fast moving area. I absolutely agree that we have a digital deficit, but it's not just competence related. It's also related to how do we work as a board, and our work process hasn't really changed very much. So I'll stop there and I'll go further in other answers. Thank you.
No, means you really brought Lizelette a very interesting point. I myself see, looking at the boards, that actually board committees have not changed in the last 20 years. You still have remuneration committee, you still have audit and risk committee, you still have, basically appointments committee. And of course, I'm not a veteran board member at all, but I struggle that in the 20 years, the whole world has changed.
Yes.
Why has the board committee's name not changed, their remit not changed? And I would not comment on the board composition. That is for all of you to, come to discussion point. But even a common man with no, huge board experience, even I can notice that the world has changed so much in 20 years, but the board committees and board compositions are pretty much the same. And you really need to be very optimistic to believe that something is right there or something is wrong there. I really believe that you really need to be an optimist to think that that is right. But that nicely segues me for the next kind of my panel, which is more around technology leaders who might be benefiting from it or suffering from it, but we will know whether they suffer or they benefit. So Ashish, you are on that hot seat of doing billion-dollar businesses with these large companies, international, multinational companies. How do you see this transformation capability in the boardroom?
Okay, so thanks Raj. Thanks for getting me in. So let's just dive into the topic, right? And I wanted to start by sort of saying, digital is like the word value. Everybody has a very different meaning and a context to the word digital and digital transformation. So I wanted to actually, at least in my head, the way I think, right? I don't use the word digital too much. I actually use technology, right? I use technology, and I perceive that actually the role of technology in the enterprise has changed over the last, maybe 5-7 years in particular, right? Up till about 2010, 2012, 2013, around that time, right? For the entire history of the technology industry, technology has been really a productivity lever for the enterprise, right? Essentially, helping you make the enterprise more effective, more efficient. That's really been largely the role which technology has played. But we are very, very, very lucky to be in the technology industry, because the role of technology has suddenly shifted from being just a productivity enabler to actually being a driver of competitive advantage, right? And I think the question which you asked, therefore, is actually very pertinent. And I would say, I would look at the world only in two dimensions, right? I would sort of say there are only established companies, and maybe in bracket, you could sort of say these are potentially getting disrupted using technology. And then there are disruptors, right? And these disruptors are people who come from a technology background, right? So that I would say I agree with Charlotte, I agree with Elizabeth, right? For established companies, there's massive changes they need to make to think about the impact of technology and how technology can be used as a competitive advantage, right? And all of that then lends itself to digital transformation, right? But I see that most of the customers are reacting to this particular change. They're on the defensive rather than being on the offensive. Whereas on the disruptors, I sort of almost think of them as tech savvy and business smart, right? And they're attacking the established guys, right? And they're attacking with weapons and approaches which the existing guys don't really have answers to, right? And if you're not careful, you'll see a massive amount of churn and change which is going to happen, right? So if we again, Elizabeth sort of talked about the word that the change is becoming very, very dynamic, right? I would say it's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and it's ambiguous, right? So the environment which you're working in is changing at a rapid pace, right? And because that environment is changing at a rapid pace, there's enough and more tech competencies in the disruptors, right? And the board level and at the technology level, right? But with the established firms in established markets, right? That capability of that competency is something which needs to be much better appreciated and much better, brought to bear on the marketplace where they're working. So completely agree with Elizabeth and Charlotte that there's much more which can be done at the level of the board in terms of the transformation capabilities which the board can use for using tech.
Thank you, Ashish. I will just clarify this. I should have clarified in the beginning. You are absolutely right. Right now, the panel discussion really is centered around the companies which are not technology-led, which is the disruptor category that you put in. So yes, absolutely, they are full of technology transformation capability because that is their main ingredient of business. So absolutely good for clarifying that on my behalf. Thank you. I will now bring this point to Natasha. Natasha, you have worked with provider side and you have worked with global banks where competitive advantage is if Credit Suisse is launching a product today and UBS is launching another product for wealth management in 1 week's time, UBS will be losing 5% of market share. So where technology is such a big differentiator, how do you see? Do you see the deficit in the general industry, not the disruptors?
Yeah, I would say that diversity, as Charlotte alluded earlier, diversity in gender, age, background, and experience is important, but boards need diversity in skills, including that digital knowledge, because for non-technology companies, and again, Liselot also mentioned that if you look at the studies done even 5 years ago, the board had maximum maximum sort of on average 5% of people with digital skills. Now, hopefully there are more, but even, you know, in traditional companies, again, as was mentioned earlier, there is a propensity to hire like for like, and that's why very often you see people or directors of those boards with more traditional approach rather than disruptor approach. And if you look at traditional companies, big traditional companies, over the last few years, they had probably on average 5% growth, if not less, whereas the disruptors had much higher growth. And in technology companies themselves, that those skills actually can certainly pay off. But if you take the application of those digital skills by the boards, that can certainly differentiate the results, because if as a product company I launch the product but I do not use digital channels, or I have no experience with digital marketing, or I don't follow the changes in the customer preferences to transact at the time, at the channel, at the device which is most convenient, I might lose business altogether. So, and I think also, in addition to that, board directors with digital skills, they often have hands-on experience, and they can challenge the existing executive teams on the execution as well, and be coaches sometimes, or even culture changers, or in such organizations. So I think definitely having directors on boards with digital skills can have a very significant impact on the company's outcomes, for sure.
Thank you, Natasha. That brings me to further develop this point. And Ashish, you may like to just start where you left last time. You are my first panelist on this topic, and the topic is very, very nicely developing topic. We talked about there is a deficit. Now, what is the scale of this deficit? And what are the implications for the company as well as the society against this deficit?
Yeah. So let's tackle each one, right? So, you know, on scale, you know, I'd start by saying that digital touches everything, right? And there's no industry, there's no corner of the economy, maybe nuclear plants, right? I'm just, you know, maybe those are the only things which will will remain untouched. Digital will touch everything, and let me bring it to life, right? You know, around 5 to 6 years back, right? I meet a lot of customers, right? Now I do that all virtually, but about 5 to 6 years back, I went to meet the CFO for large, you know, steel major across the EU, right? And I sort of, you know, asked him, you know, saying, what exactly, you know, how exactly does the work look from your window, right? And he said, very worried. And I said, why? You seem to be doing very well, right? You know, you continue to be, you know, very successful. So what are you worried about, right? And the answer which he gave actually threw me on this, right? He said that actually he was most worried about the fact that a lot of their automobile manufacturers, which is high class steel, right? Automobiles use the, you know, really good class steel, is actually getting consumed from, you know, China using Alibaba as a platform, right? And here I was thinking, okay, the fintech is actually getting disrupted, music is getting disrupted, media is getting disrupted. And here was the CFO talking to me about, you know, steel's getting disrupted because of tech platform called Alibaba, right? So on scale, I would say digital touches everything, right? There's no industry which is going to be untouched, right? The second is, what is the implication of not getting this right? Again, you know, going back to the car industry, or going back to, you know, steel and automobiles and car, I did have a mechanical engineering, so I'm a bit biased towards that. You know, if you think about what's happened to, you know, the car is now really future car is really a software platform. And who's made it? It's Tesla, right? It's Elon Musk. So it's a technology platform, right? And therefore, all the foundations of what the car industry used to be and the car used to be have got completely disrupted, right? So in my mind, you know, it's also a fact that since 1970, when the car industry consolidated to about the 20 big companies globally, there's been not one company which has come into this industry and disrupted any of the 20, right? Those 20 continue to be the people who consume all the market share in this, except when Tesla happened, right? So in my mind, if over the next 20 years, I don't think there is any reason why you will not have, or you know, the 20 auto companies which exist today, right? Are they going to stay in business for the next 20? I think it's anybody's guess. So in my mind, the scale is all encompassing. Impact is almost, you know, you either are going to, you know, thrive, or you're going to not thrive, right? Those are the only two choices which technology, you know, in some ways, or digital in some ways, presents to almost every company. And which is why I think getting the capabilities built at the board level, right, to be able to use technology / digital transformation to challenge the status quo of the markets you're in is absolutely a core competency which boards need to develop.
Thank you, Ashish. This time I'll mix and match slightly. So I will bring now the veteran board member, Charlotte, into this conversation. Charlotte.
Oh, thanks. So, I mean, for me, looking at sort of the scale and implication of the deficit in terms of the deficit of technology experience in the boardroom, I think is huge. Looking at a slightly old example, and I don't know from the inside, but looking at from the outside, for example, at a company like Marks and Spencer some years ago, where they fell behind rapidly in terms of being online with their products or not online, and 1 year after the other, you could just see that the slide was just not really helpful for them. They might have had a board at the time that was not very amenable to spending whatever million needed to be spent to have a proper online trading platform, or to actually move that along. And that can be detrimental to a company, and has almost potentially been that for Marks and Spencer. I'm serving on the board of a large construction company called Langeroog Construction, and we are trying to change the construction industry through digitalization of a lot of the processes. So we would look at off-site manufacturing. So instead of having scaffoldings and builders on the actual site, we would create, you know, 1 or 2 bedroom flats in the factory with robotics. Everything, it's tiled, it's kitted, everything is there, all robotics. We reduce health and safety. I mean, the difference is significant. And the companies that are not coming ahead of the game with these kind of things will fall behind significantly fast as well. So it literally is, as we just heard, it's a question of live or die, right, for organizations and technology, because it literally touches absolutely everything. And I think the companies or that might be set back by their boards will feel it very, very intensely. I don't think the board members, leaning into one of the questions on the chat, I don't think the board members are fully aware of this gap. I think they're feeling they're okay because they might have managed to now read the board papers on an iPad, but that's just not quite enough, right? We need to go way beyond that and actually spend some time looking into the opportunities in every single business we have for being a disruptor instead of one of the ones who die. So yes, we all need to lean into technology, every single business out there, and all board members should come along with that.
Thank you, Charlotte. That takes me to now request Liselette, your views, Liselette, on this topic.
Right. Well, I'll broaden it a bit and then give some examples. But the first thing I would say, it's definitely directly based on the company result. And I'm going to come back to some examples on that. But all the way to company survival. The problem I see is that if a lot of our companies will not make it to survival, we will also have a huge challenge in the societies and the welfare. So the spread is not just for business, the challenge will go into our societies. I think we as responsible board members and leaders really need to move on this one. I'll bring in an example from one of my research colleagues, actually, from MIT, Stephanie Werner. And they did a super interesting research where they looked into board members and board members' own perspective of if they were digitally competent or not. So they looked into 40,000 board members with, okay, fairly large companies. 62% of them claimed that they were digitally competent. But when they went down into exploring their backgrounds, actually using AI, they found that 24% of them were digitally competent. So that's a big difference. They also found some other super interesting things. They found that in order for a board to actually push the digital agenda, they need 3 digitally savvy board members. It's not going to be enough to just bring in 1, because it's very hard to educate and convince all of the others. When they did that, these 3, they actually had 70% higher profit, 38% higher revenue growth, 34% higher return on asset, and 34% higher market cap growth. So yes, there is definitely a size to the problem, but I'll actually bring in another point which has to do with the investors. And I do agree with Charlotte that the private equity industry is moving faster than the equity investors on the broader side of the game. And in that, I would say that the guidance coming through and from investors, and here I can also be critical to the private equity industry in themselves, they are not super knowledgeable themselves actually on digital either. I mean, they're numbers games, they're super good in counting, but they can also do, and actually several of the private equity guys do bring in digital teams to try to work with their companies to change this. So I think there's a lot of structure things we can do differently, and that is also needed to be done differently on the listed companies.
Thank you, Liselott. Natasha, you have the final word on this one.
I think I just maybe want to build up on what Liselott was saying around bringing digital skills. I think there are different kinds of digital expertise: e-commerce, digital marketing, mobile payments, analytics, data, as well as pure technology experience. And a board that carefully define what digital means for company are necessary, what actually it means to be digital, including specific digital skills that are more likely to impact the business line, will be better positioned, in my view, to identify the right expertise they need, because recruiting experts, no matter how brilliant they are in terms of their knowledge, it's not worth anything if those experts cannot translate or extrapolate what is applicable from their ideas or past experiences in the context of the company on the board of which they're serving. And therefore, kind of cutting and pasting digital experience from just cutting and pasting it, in my experience, it doesn't work. And beyond relevant digital experience, I think what is important, someone who can bring the broad business acumen and preferably hands-on commercial experience, because a pure technologist, product or strategy expert, or even chief digital officer, they might be helpful in pushing the company to leverage social networks or move quickly into digital content, for example, but they may lack the business experience to really translate these initiatives into the broader strategy of the business. And without that perspective, they may actually lack the influence and weight with other directors on the board and limit their effectiveness on board level debates about strategy or capital spending, etc. And I think also joining a public company board from a small private or venture-backed company with few requirements about financial reporting or governance can actually intensify that culture shock as well, in my view. So there was a question in the chat about how to build competencies for an executive with non-digital background, and I think there are different ways and means in terms of different trainings and different strategic papers, but I think you need to surround yourself with people who actually have that experience and learn on the go, because the practical experience is more important. And another question was, which I noticed, whether the companies which are public or SMEs, which ones will have the ability to survive, or what are those non-survival companies, whether they're more in the SME space or in the public space. Actually, I think it depends, because I think SME companies have better agility and the decisions are made fast, whereas in public companies, while this death can be a longer death, but it will come if the traditional attitude doesn't change to transformational. So that's here I finish, I suppose, not to dominate too much the discussion.
Thank you, Natasha. Now that really starts very nicely into the next topic, but I would just make an observation. I really struggle. I believe that strategy is the only thing, or the minimum thing, that the board should own and the board should drive. And in my humble small man's experience, I have seen boards abdicating that responsibility and relying on the CEO and the executive team to bring the strategy for endorsement. It's almost like the way you take financial responsibility of the company's accounts, but you do not give any guidance to the team to prepare those accounts. Once they come to it, you examine it and you endorse it. And coming from outside and not being a veteran board member, it seems surprising to me that if the boards had the single function which is dedicated to them to own, how can you completely abdicate that responsibility to the executive? I'm using some extreme words, it may not be true exactly that way, but in majority of the companies, that's what I'm seeing. And to me, that brings the next topic, which is, what is really the prime reason for this deficit? And what is the challenge in the overall board profile? Do you believe that the board profile is right? And why the board profile is almost constant? The companies have become from boom to bust. The companies have become a startup to billion-dollar companies, but the board composition almost remains flat.
Yeah.
So on this one, I will bring straightway, Liselotte, to you to start the debate. But I know there are others waiting for it. So yeah, just be mindful that you give them enough time. But you raise this point now.
Sure. Well, as we talked about before, I think it's much more than just the competence of the board, because it's also about keeping the board competence updated. But I also think that board work, if you haven't done board work, it's super complex. And the bigger business, or a business that is already a bit back level when you come into it, it's actually super complex to change those businesses. So many of us, when we come with executive perspective, we have easily a one topic view. But when you get to the board, you need to be super strategic. You need to keep the full complexity of the business in mind and still dare to take decisions. So I think the entire area on how we work with boards and do the board work is one area which needs to change in order for us to change this. On the competence, I have some specific views. And one of them is the nomination committees. Now, in several jurisdictions, including UK, the nomination committees are part of the board. Yeah, I mean, do I need to say more? Actually, that is not the same case in Nordics. In Nordics, the nomination committee is outside of the board, and the only member is the chairman. The rest are the major owners and independent people who help look at the board. So there's much less defense on actually what competence is needed. So I think that is one area where we can do a lot. I also think, going back to Natasha, many times when we're bringing in new people, we use headhunters. They can also up their skills on digital, I can tell you that. I can not tell you how many times they just ask me, well, what is your experience on e-commerce? And you gotta look at them and think, you think that's digital, right? And that's the only digital you think about. But if you know a business, there's so many more points than just e-commerce. And for business to business, that might not even be super relevant for them. And so I think there's several areas that needs to be improved. I also think we have a specific thing in Europe, and that is that we have a bit of challenge with the startup scene and the financing of the startup scene. And if you look at that, I mean, that is bringing much of the new skills in. And if we don't breed enough of those up, that will also be a bit of hinder, because the problem is if you bring people into boards which have been on smaller startups, they instead lack the challenge of actually running a bigger business. So it's very hard for them to add value. They have specific areas they can add value to. So I think there's a number of reasons that we have this deficit, but there's also a number of things we can do work and change on this topic.
So Charlotte, you have been board member for more than 15 years now. And of course, we all know how many boards you have sat on and how many committees or chair positions you have held. How do you see that composition change? Do you see the reasons for them? What's your view on this one?
So from my point of view, the prime reason for the deficit, just to sort of feed into the question, is that the average age in a boardroom, at least for the UK FTSE, is 64. That's a good starting point, right? We're simply too old, right? And I know it's not very good to talk about young or old, but again, this is one of my things. We have got to have different generations in the boardroom. I'm not saying we have boards of 25-year-olds, right? But I'm saying we have boards with people from different decades. So maybe one in their 20s, one in their 30s, one in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and maybe one in their 70s. But when we all are in the 60s or 70s, we're not helping ourselves here. So that's definitely one prime reason from where I can see. Generational diversity is absolutely needed in the boardroom. I think it's the overall composition when you look at all businesses all over. So I tend to look at governance as global, because there are certain principles that goes across all organizations in all countries. There are certain things that everybody does. We all have finance, we all have legal documents, we all have banking business, and we all have technology. Those are the 4 basic skills that every boardroom should have, in my view. And you still see boards that hasn't got that, but those are the 4 basic skills that every single organization, it being a charity or school, whatever it is, FTSE 100, we all have those 4 aspects. And we need that mindset of each of those aspects on the board to have the starting point of that diversity. And then we have all the other things below it. From my point of view, in terms of the boards that I serve on, when you are consciously looking for proper diversity, it is not that difficult, right? Yes, it's complex to be on a board, but it is also common sense. You make common sense decisions. So you need people in there that can look at things with a common sense and can make decisions based on that, who understands what's going on in society and who understands the importance of being with that on the forefront, not on the back foot. And that's what needs to change in the boardroom. And I'm back to the average age, 64 is just too high, and I'm not popular for saying that, but it just is holding us back, actually.
Well, thank you, Charlotte. As usual, always a very frank and direct opinion, so much well respected. And I'm sure you don't want to pause that either, so it will stay on record. So that brings me nicely to Natasha now. Again, from the big technology leader perspective, one point, and the other point, Natasha, from being in the technology leadership position within a hugely, or maybe the largest insurer of the world, how does it seem to you? And you can purge some of your remarks, don't worry about it. You'll have the opportunity to do so, but yeah, be frank.
Yes, Sure. Just to put things into perspective, Allianz is a major insurance and one of the largest asset management companies, the market leader in Germany with very strong international position. We have about 150,000 employees in 70 countries and serve 100 million customers around the world. One of our strengths and challenges as well from technology perspective is that we have a multitude of different products and services, from pet insurance to life insurance to credit insurance to also insuring Burj Khalifa and footballers' legs and you name it. So, and providing roadside assistance. So we have different, about over 67, I think, about 70 operating entities, which and some of them global lines, as we call them. So they have very different needs as well. And I think being a technology leader in a company like that has certain challenges, but also creates a special position really in the strategic development and transformation of those companies. And one of the challenges comes even from within internal teams when we discuss what are the advantages to our ultimate clients. The teams very often bring technology perspective in and say, oh, we will have the increased CPU, or we will have something else. And I try to pivot it towards more what is the ultimate client benefit. Does it mean I would be able as a client or as an agent to log in quicker? Does it mean I don't need to flick between the screens, etc.? So I think it's quite important. And there was a question also in the chat whether technology leaders sometimes struggle to bring the right perspective to the board. And I think sometimes it is true, especially when you focus on technical features, you kind of lose the audience very quickly because you need to actually explain what does it mean from strategic and from the customer perspective. But also, in addition to that, if you think of the startups, the smaller companies, they also sometimes struggle as well to make those connections because to the bigger companies and to the boards, because sometimes they create a product and then try to find a problem for it. So, which is why they sometimes struggle with the investors as well. On the other hand as well, companies like Allianz and also many others in financial services industry, they have all tipped their toes or sometimes went quite deep with technology startup nurseries or incubators and whatnot. And where I see the advantage as well as a technology leader is, unlike venture capitalists, which Liselott mentioned, companies like ours, we don't have the pressure to monetize that investment in 2 or 3 years or in 1 year. We actually can help develop it and also see how we can apply it into our business and get the competitive advantage of it. So, but on the other hand, also being a technology leader within the company like Allianz or big international company, you have to also be conscious that the main foundation of technology is stability, and stability creates trust. And if you have a lot of legacy and instability, that also is an impediment to transformation, because if the business is experiencing instability, they are then cautious to embrace those new technologies and new channels because they see it more of the hindrance in their customer relationships or NPS scores. So I think as a technology leader, you need to make sure, apart from digital transformation, you don't forget about the foundations, which is stability, standardization, and zero impact of outages onto the business as well. So you kind of run 2 agendas, run and change, and you cannot do change if you don't do run properly as well. So that's my perspective.
Thank you, Natasha. Before I go to Ashish, let me share one story with you. I can't resist, so I will have to share this. I was 3 years back, I was talking to a CEO of a company which is about $1.4 billion. And he was asking about something around technology transformation and how his business model should change. Then I said, look, in your industry, I don't have huge experience. Why don't you ask your CIO? The moment I took that name, I could see wrinkles coming on his forehead. And he said, you know what, between the closed doors, when I get that guy, half of the day I am drained out of energy. So what I have done now is I have now made him report to my CFO so that I don't have to deal with it. I am not saying that that is the common persona of a CIO. And I'm also not saying the CEO is right or wrong. Of course, CEO is wrong. But I also believe that something the technology leaders should do so that they can simplify life for the senior management and the board. If that does not happen, the boards also have to go backwards to learn and live with the technology and not delegate it completely because this is what is the cutting edge. But the equal onus, I think, lies also on the technology leaders. If they do not make technology simpler for the boards, then the chances are boards who are into the controlling position for the wrong reason, but the chances are they will make them dinosaurs and they will start putting people into the technology transformation or the digital area who may not be competent enough technologically, but who are able to simplify the language. And so it will hurt both sides, but that is a very small man's view. I don't want to bias that because I've got the best man to answer that question, which is Ashish. So Ashish, in your global boardroom experiences, when you go and talk to the customers, what do you see the deficit is?
So I think the other panelists have already covered this from all the dimensions, right? So if I were to sort of summarize, right, I think the problem is at both ends, right? There's a problem at the level of the board, right? There's obviously, Charlotte talked about the average age in the FTSE board is 64, right? That obviously means that, the technology familiarity slash ability to use technology or sort of project where technology is, taking your business is going to be a bit maybe constrained, right? I would say I would say it manifests itself in many ways, right? The first and foremost, what I've seen with most of my customers is that they deal with technology or they deal with digital transformation defensively, right? Now, just the nature of how we built our business, we tell our customers you have to be thinking more offensively because digital, in other word, is opportunity, right? It's not a threat. So if you don't think of it as a threat and if you think of it as an opportunity, there are massive things which you could do, right? So in my mind, the boards, and this is only 3 to 5% of the boards or the customers which I deal with. There are few customers who are starting to think about technology slash digital as a competitive advantage, right? And not as a cost, not as a cost center, right? And that just starts to drive a completely different behavior. And, then you start looking for the set of people, which you need in the board to be able to start, creating the capability of business and tech to come together to start thinking offensively in the context of your industry, right? I think that's part one. Part two, and maybe the more important problem, and I think Jonathan Leeson sort of wrote about this in the chat, right? It's really around the fact that the technology industry and us as technologists or technology leaders don't do anybody a favor because we are full of jargon, right? And we are like too much tech, right? So we talk tech all the time. And, whenever somebody comes in and wants to have a sane business conversation, if we don't understand how to do the same business conversation, we will divert it into the, the jargon of tech, right? And suddenly the other person is going to, start feeling very left out, right? So I think the problem exists at both ends. The technology industry and the technology teams don't help themselves by not really focusing. Technology is just a tool, right? It's a lever, right? How do you use this for impact is the question which is really primary, right? And from the board side, because the board is is not comfortable with tech, right? either they are outsourcing it, right? And with outsourcing it, they're outsourcing it to consultants. I see suddenly that the business to IT consulting, organizations are all over the boards, right? And they're actually giving you the same damn presentation which you're giving them to the giving to the presentation to the competition, right? So the same is being refurbished. In fact, what I've seen in the 3 to 5% customers who are brilliant at this, I've started seeing that they're actually first they're changing their attitude. I want to dive in. I want to get into this. Right. The second thing which they're starting to do is they're starting to almost create the capability for a technology and business conversation, right? And start sort of leading from the front. And once you start getting those two things sort of sorted out, then you'll find the talent, you'll find everything else, right, to align to it. So in my mind, there's lots which needs to be changed, but I do see few of my customers and few of my of customers which I meet thinking of this offensively rather than defensively. I would almost sort of start from there.
Thank you, Ashish. I must interrupt here because I did again the same mistake. I would just apologize to our audiences today. We had Brian Solis earlier planned as a panel member, and I'm really very sorry that I could not have Brian today. It was not because of anything, but just due to an exceptional circumstances. His company pulled him out for right reasons. So I do apologize to our audience that despite an expectation that Brian will be in this panel, Brian Solis is not, and he has sent his apologies. You can connect with Brian on LinkedIn and ask him any questions directly. He will definitely honor that. And I really apologize. I should have told it to you right in the beginning. So with that apologies out of the way, I will start the next interesting topic, which is, Ashish, you nicely started there, but now I'm going to add more meat to it. So Natasha, what are the opportunities you see around bridging this deficit? If the board deficit is bridged properly, what do you see in terms of gains, not only to the companies or the people, but to the wider society or to the planet?
Well, I certainly think that, people talk about the fourth industrial revolution and digital, but I'm thinking of the fifth industrial revolution where companies actually invest back into society and contribute to the society, whether it is sustainability measures, whether it is even bigger contributions into the sectors which have been under or overlooked and underinvested, whether it's a development of the skills, future skills, etc. So, for example, I would see where, in terms of bridging the deficit, first of all, I think the boards themselves and the recruitment companies which they hire, they should be open to bring those new skills in, because as we already discussed earlier, I can certainly see that there is still a very big tendency, at least in the UK, to hire like for like, very traditional approaches. So that doesn't kind of shift the it doesn't move the dial really as much, and many people who would be otherwise benefiting both from the board experience and benefiting the companies they serve on the boards, they don't simply have access to those boards because there are big roadblocks with the traditional thinking recruitment companies. And therefore I really like the approach which Liselott described outside of the UK. I think also non-tech executives could spend more time with startups to see how it's working as the board members or advisory board members, and I've done it myself, 2 startups, and that gives you also quite a lot of experience. And non-tech executives could be assigned even like a technical coach or mentor from a startup or from another from another technical background. And I think someone mentioned it in the chat as well, so I don't want to take the credit for it. There are many different ways ways how you can actually enrich that experience. And also many companies like Salesforce, which I also worked in before joining Allianz, they play an important role, and technical companies, others like Microsoft and AWS, they really play an important role in future-proofing the next generations for the technology skills which will be required in the future. And there I can see, I have seen dojos or other setups which the companies like that do to enhance the skills, or even internally. Deutsche Bank, for example, has been for many years a big sponsor of various programs in universities, which they used as a pool for incoming skills, where together with the technology providers like IBM, for example, or others, there were different competitions which allowed the teams in the universities to work in an agile way to develop some products. And actually, sometimes those products were better than the ones developed internally by the bank. So I think companies here really play an important role in the big kind of society context as well. And I think that's where boards should also play an important role, because companies very often have the intangible, intangible assets like their reputation, like their brand and contribution to society. In many cases, like sustainability, skills building, future-proofing the skills of the generations. I think a company becomes part of the ecosystem, and not necessarily just commercial ecosystem, but bigger ecosystem. And another example could be where the companies like tech companies, and Salesforce has done that, working with charities to bring the diversity back, to bring like women who have been moms, to educate them into technology skills so they can continue with their flexible working in the technical fields, in the areas where jobs, multiple millions or thousands and millions of jobs could be created as well. It's the job creation and ultimately the prosperity of the society. So I see that there are multiple opportunities, and I'm also glad that from this societal and sustainability agenda, companies play more and more important roles. Definitely Allianz does as well. So very, very proud of what we do as well. And boards in that respect, I think they have also a huge influence of what the companies do in the digital space. So yeah. So I'm quite excited and passionate about topic.
No, that's absolutely fine. That's the whole idea, to bring your passion to life. So absolutely no problem at all. But I will go to Ashish now. Ashish touched upon this slightly. But Ashish, in your view, opportunities with bridging this deficit?
So over to me.
It's to Ashish. Ashish was on mute. Yeah.
So so basically, I'll take a large existing customer sort of view to this, right? The way I think about how large organizations can use digital, right? We've discussed that there's a deficit, right? And we've discussed that the deficit needs to be sort of managed at multiple levels, right? And that's something which is quite evident, right? The way I tend to think about it, and this is increasingly what I'm starting to see in some of the more mature customers, right? You almost sort of divide the problem into, how can you use the tech to really impact your current markets, right? And that is really something which, let's say, a CDIO type of a position in the enterprise is now enabling that conversation to happen, right? How do you sort of use tech to become more agile, to become more flexible, right? And start driving your ability to deliver more to existing markets using technology, right? Is part one of what, the opportunities for enterprises are, right? The second, and the one which I'm really more excited about, is that 3 to 5% of my customers who are doing, cool stuff, right? And what I'm really finding is that these companies are essentially going out into the innards of their business, finding out business leaders who understand their business at depth, right? And who are very comfortable with technology, right? And giving them the freedom to fly. right? And giving them the ability to sort of say, okay, can you create a tech-led proposition in my market, which is going to not just, disrupt my existing position in the market, but actually maybe it's going to disrupt a sideways industry, right? A new product in a new market, or a existing product in a new market. Can I do some of those, experiments, right? And this is an agenda which I'm seeing a lot of my enterprise customers own, not at the level of the executive, but at the level of a board. And the structuring of this is typically done outside the core large organization, because Natasha said this, I think Lizelle talked about it, and Charlotte as well. In my mind, actually, large companies find it very difficult to innovate and to create stuff which is going to be disruptive to their core value proposition to the marketplace, right? So you need to almost go inside your organization, create that ability, and that's a massive opportunity. I'll give you one example very quickly, right? There's a very large logistics company, right? And they actually found a business leader like that. The guy used to head the UK business, right? And they pulled him out from the business and created a technology venture startup. And guess what, right? The person actually just said, okay, let's look at the cost of goods sold of this logistics company. These are my top 6 costs, right? On each cost, they started building a platform, right? And that platform, now they've started doing tie-ups, right? So in a logistics industry, one of the topmost cost is, seasonal labor. They hire and, release a lot of labor over a period of time. So they've created a platform which is an equivalent of Uber Works, right? And now they have tied up with a PE firm, right? A shared 50% equity. And suddenly now they are in the business of, Uber Works, right? With them being the primary customer. So I'm just saying there are so many brilliant examples which I see, but I see that in a very small part of my customer base. And I see that's the opportunity which a lot of organizations have, right? Improve positions, that's something which can happen within the firm. But if you want to really disrupt and think in a naughty way, as it were, right? Using technology to further your business goals, then that's an opportunity which is also available.
Thank you, Ashish. That takes me nicely to Charlotte now. Charlotte, your views.
Thank you. So in terms of opportunity, I'm going to use a slightly outdated example as well, but I think it's still brilliant. Blockbusters versus Netflix. I mean, it's even more brilliant today because it's so clear what happened with Blockbusters when the board actually laughed Netflix out of the boardroom when they offered themselves up for sale for 50 million. I mean, hello, that's what we're looking at, right? That has not changed. The principle of what opportunities you're missing is exactly that. So if you keep remembering Blockbusters and Netflix, I think you would do yourself a favor as a senior leader, as a director, to understand what difference it can make when you have bridged this gap and you actually push the right kind of things. Just 5 years ago, I was in a group of non-execs, FTSE non-execs, around the table, and one of the guys there, when we talked about retail and digital, actually said, the internet, it has made no difference to our business. He's not on the board anymore, funny that. But I mean, and he shouldn't be, right? I think today he wouldn't say that. Today he would probably not be a board member, because if you hadn't got it 5 years ago, maybe it's not even possible to get there. But we just need to weed out some of all this stuff, right? And we need to be very clear. We need to pick out the really obvious examples that everybody can relate to and say, that's your company if you don't start getting your brain going. And whether you're 64, actually, it's lifelong learning, right? When do we ever stop learning? If people think that they're done by the time they're 50 or 40 or whatever, well, that's wrong, because the way the world goes, we will all learn until the day we draw our last breath.
Thank you, Charlotte, for a very crisp and punchy view. I'm now giving this challenge to Lizelle to be short and sharp on this one. But
okay, then I'll just bring up 2 points. I think one, we talk very much about individual people on a very defined board. And I think that is one of the things we should challenge, actually. And that is an opportunity right now to challenge that. And I think you can look at, I'll draw another analogy. You can look at board as a flower with different petals. And actually, you can do a lot of things. You can have different committees. You can have advisory boards. One of the things that is more common in Australia and New Zealand is that you actually assign really tough strategic engagements to your top talents. And they go away and they come back and they represent it back to the board. So everybody that you need don't necessarily need to sit on the board, but you need, as a board member, to find new ways to actually get that knowledge in. So I'll say that as one thing. And then the other thing I would say, what's the opportunity? Well, the opportunity is to solve important problems. I think many of our businesses have absolutely solved things and we have delivered things, but maybe we haven't solved the most important problems. And I think this is a huge opportunity. In fact, those problems that are important can't even be solved without technology. You really need technology to solve the most important problems. And I think that's where we need to go with many of our businesses.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I was tempted to say something, but I'm conscious of time, so I'd rather keep shut. But basically, I'm trying to bring it now to the last point, but because of the time, can I say that what are one or two, advice from each one of you to the boards to bring this deficit into control? And this one, basically, this is call for action. And this one, I will start with the most experienced board member right now in the panel, which is Charlotte. So Charlotte, you set the ball rolling on this inspirational piece.
Well, that's, I can do that pretty quick. For me, get reverse mentors. There was someone mentioning tech mentors, right? You can also get younger people, get under 25-year-old mentors. I've had that for 7 years and I've learned a lot from them. They look at technology completely differently and they use it in a different way. If we should not be arrogant around us thinking that we are beyond learning, this is back to that. We have to continuously develop, and younger people can help us do that when we respect equally the information that they can give us. Again, if you think of the Blockbuster board, if each of those board members had had a reverse mentor and asked them, what would you like, streaming or go to the shop? I think they might have made a different decision because they would have got a very clear steer from those reverse mentors. So that's my one call to action.
Thank you, Charlotte. That takes me to Natasha, your advice to the boards.
I would say that the board should embrace diversity and bring new profiles in, including women in technology as well, and also not look necessarily at all the same and similar experiences, but really embrace the new and be really more open for this.
Thank you, Natasha. That's very, very sharp. That brings me again to Elizabeth.
Okay, so I think my first advice is actually to owners. Get a good chair, because the chair is so impactful in every board. And it's very hard to change the focus of the board if the chair isn't doing that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I would bring up 3 areas that we identified also in our research, and that is you need to be better at foresight. And you need to find ways to do that. You need to be much better in actually doing and knowing when to do the pivot. And the only way to do that is to start to have an intertwine between strategy and innovation. You need to figure out how you're going to govern that. And the third thing is on alignment. And alignment means be brave and actually move resources to the most important areas. So those would be 3 areas.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That now brings me to Ashish to have the last word on this one.
So I'll keep it short and snappy, Raj, right? I'd say I start with my favorite thing, which is change posture, right? Instead of being attacked, please attack, right? That's really the first and most important, thinking change, which I think most boards need to do, right? You have market share, you have so much of entrenched strengths in what you play. It's just a question of, changing the posture from defending to really being, really sort of thinking of digital as an opportunity, right? And the second and maybe more important one is dive in, right? We technologies don't make it easy for everybody to understand technology, right? But it's not that difficult if you disintermediate technology to only one thing. What is it that is going to deliver to you in terms of impact, right? So in my mind, the best way to deal with technology is devolve it completely to what is the impact which it can create in your industry. If you can get that answer, right? So change posture and dive in are the two things which I would say, right? And I think everybody sort of said that the answers will come from within your business, right? So there has to be a way in which you identify the talent of tomorrow, which is going to help you build the model of tomorrow, right? If you take these three things, right, and you apply them well enough, right, you'll find absolutely brilliant answers coming through. So I'm seeing only the bold and the brave, right, and people willing to attack, right, rather than defend. Create the models which get me excited as a guy who loves business and then loves technology and its ability to impact the business at scale.
That's a lovely note to bring this to almost close. But before I really formally close this one, first of all, can I take this opportunity on behalf of our panelists and the Institute of Directors to thank our lovely audience, to have a very, to have the patience to have this on working week again. And of course, at the end of the day, it's very close to the end of the day. So thank you to all for attending this. I do apologize again for not letting you know why brand service was not in the panel. So again, sorry about that. But lastly, I would really like to thank Ashish, Lizelette, Natasha, and our very own Charlotte to really give their valuable time to be a part of this panel and enlighten us with your thinking. But before I formally draw this to close, I would always bring to our notice one thing, that there are people who work very hard to make this sense happen. And sometimes we just even don't notice them. So I must say I'm thankful to Juliet, Tanya, and Julie of Institute of Directors. I'm thankful to a lot many other people as well in IoD who make this happen by doing various things. And I'm really thankful to all of you to give up your time and your thoughts. And I hope to see you very, very soon. Have a lovely late afternoon. And thank you again. Thank you.